Hi, and welcome to Dragons and Aliens, the channel where we talk about sci-fi and fantasy books, old and new. And today we are going to talk about Dune. We're going to give an overview of the six-book series. We're going to look at some of the problematic things in the books, including their homophobia and their depiction of children. And we're going to also look at what is so enduring and appealing about the Dune universe, particularly the first book, and how that book has been adapted for film and other media. So I should say that the reason why we're doing this now is that I have just read all six, or just finished reading all six of the Dune books, which I feel is a massive achievement that I should inflict on the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And I think what is going to be interesting about this episode is that I've read all the Dune books.
Mhm.
Simon has only read the first book.
No, he's not even read that.
Simon has not read the first book, but he has watched the film adaptations of the first book, both the recent couple of Denis Villeneuve films and the David Lynch version. Not, I believe, the Richard Harrison miniseries of the early noughties. But so basically, Simon knows the story of the first book. And I think my impression, people can correct me in the comments if I'm really wrong, is that a lot of people who would describe themselves as real Dune heads and real fans of Dune are only really familiar with the first book. And I think there's so it's interesting to have Simon's perspective on, and I think there's a reason for that, which I think we'll come onto. What are you about to say?
Well, I think the analogy might be Ulysses by James Joyce, right? Now, I have read Ulysses. I have. I'm not showing off. I did an English degree. But there are lots of
Look,
people.
Simon read Ulysses. That's amazing.
It's a great
Everyone.
book. There are lots of people who feel ashamed they've not read it, and they kind of lie about it. They say, "Oh yeah, I've read it."
Oh no! Right now, if I say I've read it, it's going to sound like I'm lying, Simon. So I'm not even going to say it.
But like Moby Dick, right? People pretend they've read these books because they feel they should have read them. And I think that about Dune. I suspect at some stage I probably pretended I'd read it. I'm too old for that now. I've never read it. I will read it probably at some point. But I suppose what my perspective on it is that in a weird way, the influence of Dune is so massive in terms of its cinema history, in terms of its wider cultural history, so video games, which we'll talk about, and actual gaming in general, because there is a connection with Games Workshop and Warhammer that needs to be talked about, Warhammer 40,000. That means that I kind of feel I don't need to read it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I
I'm
would
soaked in
say,
it like a sandworm
I
in
would
spice.
say if you've read, what a beautiful analogy that is. I would say probably yes, if you have read the first, if you've seen the films, both
Yeah.
films of the first book, you probably don't need to read the first book. And I think my top line thought on the first book is that I think the reason why the first book is so popular and why many people do not progress is that the first book has got a really nice classic fantasy arc, the arc that is used in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, that is used in the original Star Wars trilogy, now episodes 4 to 6, which is basically that good triumphs over evil, and it takes the entirety of the series for that to happen. And right at the end, good has won, evil has been defeated. It's the end of the trilogy or series and satisfaction. And as in many series or many fantasy and sci-fi books, there's a chosen one. He spends some time struggling with being the chosen one, eventually manages to step up and become the chosen one, defeats the Harkonnens, yay. So I think, plus it's got some sort of nice classic fantasy tropes I think people can easily connect to, which is the medieval feudalism, the focus on wars between great houses. That's something that people can quite easily get behind. What happens after the first book, which we'll get into, is basically good triumphs over evil at the end of the first book. And the Harkonnens are, at least in the books, I know they have incarnations in Dune Prophecy recently and in some of the other prequel books written by Frank Herbert's son. But in the books, the Harkonnens are gone. Like, there's no more Harkonnen antagonist. So basically what happens in the books is that at the end of the first book, good triumphs, and then all the other books are really about how good triumphs and then becomes progressively weirder and weirder and weirder until it is indistinguishable from evil. And it's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Has some really deep thoughts about human sexuality, about autocracy, a lot of political thoughts about autocracy versus democracy, about how we can control or should control people. It's lots of really deep thinking and some really deep psychological thinking, but it hasn't got that satisfying arc where we go, yay, no more Baron Harkonnen. And I think it's for that the first book is so popular. And by far, I should also say, by far, almost exclusively the only book that's adapted. Like all the films so far, I know that the third Villeneuve film is going to go on and adapt Dune Messiah, the second book as well. But the films so far, nearly all of the games, the recent graphic novel series, which I've also got, which was written by his son and his co-writer, the sci-fi writer Anderson. Even like the recent tabletop role-playing game that came out I think in 2021 and is the most best reviewed and highly most regarded Adventures in the Imperium. They're all about the first book. The only adaptation that there is of the subsequent books is the Richard Harrison early noughties 2 mini-series, and the second one does cover Dune Messiah and Children of Dune, but the other ones are hard to adapt. They're weird, philosophical, and well, we'll get on to the dodginess. The dodginess is also in the first book, I should say. Simon, sorry.
Well, I was wanting to ask you a question, is that I think, the analogy of Moby Dick and Ulysses probably also holds, because Dune has a reputation as being quite hard going as a bit of literature, and as somebody who's not read it, I wanted to ask you if that is the case. Does it become progressively more difficult? Is it all stylistically quite hard? What's your take on that, Jay?
I would say actually it's not stylistically hard or difficult to read, or at least the first 4 books are not. I would say do not be at all afraid of reading Dune. Actually, it's much more accessible than a lot of, I would say it's easier to read than some of the big epic sci-fi fantasy writers that of now, like Brandon Sanderson or people like that. Because it's not that Brandon Sanderson is a hard reader to read, but it's got this really sort of beautiful, lucid mid-20th century feel to it, where everything, there was a way of writing them where everything was very clear, and the book is very well made, it's very well structured. The descriptive writing is lucid, it's not difficult. There's actually some of the best descriptions of fight scenes I've ever read in an SFF novel.
Which is hard to do, right? That's a hard thing to pull off, I think.
Fight scenes are really difficult. Yeah. He does them really, really well by linking them always to emotion and the emotional arc of what people are thinking. Yeah. But they're very lucid, and yes, there is esoteric mysticism, Bene Gesserits and Kwisatz Haderach and all that, but there isn't any more than ends up in the adaptations. So I really wouldn't worry about that. They're nicely plotted, they're nicely structured. I would say definitely go ahead and read it. It's not that hard. And if you've seen the films, or at least the recent films, you'll have a strong visual image of what it's going to be like. You'll find it quite easy to get into. So I would read it, Simon.
And the other thing that I remember from way back as a teenager, buying Dragon magazine and Games Master magazine, and even when it was still a magazine, it wasn't just about Games Workshop, White Dwarf, was that actually people often talked about the 3 books. So Dune, Dune Messiah and Children of Dune being manageable. And then again, this idea that suddenly Frank Herbert goes off a cliff with the last 3. So again, that's an interesting perspective.
He does go off a cliff. I think so. I think it's definitely a lot of people, once they get to the 4th book,
Yeah.
find it so weird that it's strange. I mean, actually, what it is in terms of plot really is that the first four books form a continuous story, and then the last two books start a completely new cycle. And then, sorry, I should just preface all of this by saying this episode will contain spoilers for what happens in the later Dune books. Don't watch if you don't want to know. Dune is complicated enough to talk about without trying to avoid spoilers. So the last two books, major spoilers, start a new cycle, and Frank Herbert dies before completing that cycle. It was then finished by his son, Brian. Brian.
Brian Herbert.
It's Brian and Bruce. Brian, who wrote two more books, but yeah, and they just become. I mean, they're not terrible, but they just become less engaging in terms of they have less nice, clear plots and less clear characters to root for, and just there are interminable discussions between the Tleilaxu and the Ixians and things like that that just make you want to eat your own head. There's also the last book has something in it which I'll come to, which is so dodgy that I would have not finished it if I almost didn't finish it. It was so dodgy. But I was only 50 pages off the end, and I thought, I can't be the person who didn't finish the Dune series, so I did. But in all other circumstances, I would have not finished it. I think, right, we need to organise this. I'm going to do a brief and really try and keep it concise overview of little mini summaries of each book so that we know what we're talking about. And then maybe we'll get into some of what I think. I think what is genuinely dodgy about these books, which are primarily homophobia and sexualization of children. But I'll try and gloss over that when
I've got an idea to help you and our viewers. Is that I'm going to time you. I'm going to give you a time limit. So
please, let's do it.
Do you want 6 minutes?
What, for all 6 books?
Yeah.
As an attempt. I will try, but I'm not going to. I will try. Yeah, I think that's good.
Go on, let's give it a go.
I think. Look, I think I'm not really going to talk about the first book because I think we can assume that level of knowledge with our readership. But basically, yeah, we've talked about the first book. Epic Atreides, Harkonnen conflict. Really great battle, compelling presentation of the Chosen One. Paul has battle drums made of Harkonnen skin. Big battle, they win.
Okay.
So what happens in the second book is we're 12 years on from the first book. Paul and Chani are childless, which is but have 2 children right at the end of the book. It focuses on a plot to unseat Paul Atreides, who's now the Emperor of the Universe, controller of the spice, ruler of Dune, and it introduces a race called the Tleilaxu, who are the main antagonists in this book. They're genetic manipulators. They're an advanced race known for their mastery of biological engineering, and this is going to be complex, so I need to explain this properly. It might go over a minute. They have 2 main creations, one of which is the Gola, and Gola are clones. So they are clones of people who've lived before. Using cells, they can clone people who've died and bring them back. But these Gola can also regain not only their memory of their first life, but they can regain, if you keep bringing back the same person as a Gola or a clone, they can regain their memories of all their Gola incarnations, so potentially thousands of incarnations. So that's important. The Tleilaxu, the genetic manipulators, have the ability to create something called face dancers, which is more straightforward. People who can take on the identical physical appearance of other people, useful in plots. This book is about a plot against Paul Atreides by an alliance of factions who've fallen from power when he defeated the Emperor Saddam at the end of the first book. So it's an alliance between House Carino, the Emperor's house, the Guild Navigators, the Bene Gesserit, and the Tleilaxu, who I've just been talking about. In the end, the plot succeeds. Paul is blinded in an atomic explosion and he walks into the desert. Chani dies in childbirth, sorry, Zendaya fans. And Alia, who is Paul's younger sister, so she's the one who Jessica is pregnant with in the Dune films. If you've only seen the Dune films, but who isn't born yet, but who Jessica is talking to in the womb. Alia is left as the regent and raises the twins. So I actually really liked this book. I thought it was really lucid and nice and a good plot. Children of Dune is the book where I started to write in my notes over and over again, oh my God, this is so fucking weird. This is too weird. So this opens when the twins so Chani dies in childbirth at the end of Dune Messiah. Two twins are born who are called Leto, like Paul's father in the first book, Leto II and Ganima. And they are 9 years old when this book opens. And again, it's a plot book. So it's a plot by people from House Carino trying to regain the throne who attempt to assassinate these two twins. And the Tleilaxu and the Bene Gesserit are also slightly the antagonists. So they send these tiger beasts to eat and murder the twins, who are 9 years old. The twins manage to fight off the tiger beast, but Leto, the boy twin, Leto II, flees into the desert at 9 years old, where he encounters Paul, who is not dead, as we thought maybe in previous books, but is living in the desert as a blind preacher. And this is where it starts getting really weird. Leto, the 9-year-old boy, so there's something called, which you won't know about if you haven't seen if you've only seen the film or read the first book. The sandworms are created by these little dry fish that swim in the sand called sand trouts. They're embryonic sandworms. So the boy Leto flees into the desert where he uses the sand trout. He merges with the sand trout. So their skin sticks to his skin. He becomes covered in sand trout, which starts his process of turning into a sandworm. So it gives him superhuman strength, invulnerability, near immortality, all really good things, except he has to be a sandworm. He isn't actually doesn't properly turn into a sandworm in this book. He comes back to the palace with his invulnerability and defeats everyone. Paul dies. Alia, who in a little flashback to the Harkonnens has turned evil by this point because she has been taken over by her genetic memories, specifically the Baron Harkonnen from the first book. She commits suicide, and Ganima marries Leto. I will skirt over this and come back to the weirdness about children before once we finish. But yeah, anyway, sort of victory for House Atreides of sorts, given that one is a sandworm and has married his 9-year-old sister.
There you go. So, just so you know, Jay, that's 6 minutes on the first 3 books. I think that's pretty good, right?
I'll keep going fast. Yeah, okay.
All right. Or
I'll go faster.
We could pause and just talk about that. So
I think we should keep going. Right. I think we should just overview it. I'll go faster because I've explained various things like the Tleilaxu, and but because I think this leads quickly into God Emperor of Dune. So in God Emperor of Dune is basically continuous, but we flash forward 3,500 years. Leto II has been the ruler of the universe, controller of the spice, and you guessed it, God Emperor of Dune for 3,500 years. He is now pretty much transformed into a sandworm. He is 7 meters long, but he has a human face and hands. People don't like him much. He's stopped, he's controlled the spice and has blocked spice production so nobody can travel anywhere. He keeps bringing back the Duncan Idaho Gola. So Duncan Idaho, if you remember, is the Atreides swordmaster in the first book. And he keeps bringing back Duncan Idaho as a Gola clone. He's brought him back thousands and thousands of times, and the Gola is getting pissed off with it. So it centers on a plot by this Gola with another woman called Siona, who's a descendant of his sister Ganima, his twin sister, Leto's twin sister. A plot between them and some people called the Ixians, who are a new race who are introduced. They are basically people who are defying the prohibitions of the Butlerian Jihad by starting to produce thinking machines. Is a plot against Leto II, the sandworm. The Ixian ambassador seduces him. He knows about it because he knows everything because he's an all-powerful sandworm, but agrees to marry her. They end up throwing him off a bridge into some water. Water is bad for sand trouts and sandworms. He dies, although he goes into his constituent sand trout and the Dune universe. So I think we can pause there if you want, Simon.
Yeah, that's
for
yeah.
some reactions.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's so much to say about all of that. The first is that, again, as somebody who's never read Dune, but feels like they're immersed in the culture of it. The culture of it, that's not what I mean. In the world of it, in the kind of...
There is a culture of it, for sure.
Well, there is a culture of Dune, yeah. I still have nightmares about the idea of a 9-year-old boy transforming into a giant sandworm hybrid.
As you should, Simon. As you should,
right?
As is entirely appropriate.
The other thing that's interesting is that I think just hearing that overview is that women don't seem to come out very well in Frank Herbert's universe. Like they seem to kind of have a really poor ending, and I don't know if that is whether that's misogyny or whether it is Herbert saying something about the position of women in society, because I've not read them, right? And even if you think about the end of the Denis Villeneuve film, where it's absolutely apparent that I've forgotten her name, Zendaya's character, is devastated. Yeah, is devastated by the outcome.
Actually, she's not in the books, but yeah. I mean, I would say on women, look, I think that, like I've said, I'm going to talk about homophobia and sexualization of children, which I think are deeply problematic.
Yeah.
I think there is sexism in Frank Herbert, but I would say that is more of the just like, it's of its time, what you would expect. He is, because he is, and I would say a nod as well to the Bene Gesserit, who are a sisterhood of women who retain power throughout all the books and don't lose it. I would say that Herbert becomes increasingly through these books preoccupied with genetics, preoccupied with breeding, and he becomes increasingly interested in differences between the sexes. Like he's always going on about the differences between men and women, which he believes are absolutely profound. And you can kind of see, like, his male characters do end up being the ones who rule, usually apart from the Bene Gesserit. And towards the end of the books, the series of books, he is quite derogatory in his authorial voice about the Bene Gesserit and dismissive of them as
I was about to say,
gaggle of women.
They're presented as witches visually.
They are presented as witches.
That's a problematic representation of women, isn't it? I would have said.
It is. Well, we haven't gotten onto the Honoured Madre yet. There's a cult in the later books called the Honoured Madre who arise, who I'll talk about, who are much worse than the Bene Gesserit. But yes, I would say that there's some of its time sexism in the books. I think probably I should talk about the things that I do, because I feel like I keep saying homophobia.
Well, let's come to that in a minute, because the other thing I wanted to say just on that arc is, and again, I hadn't planned to go into talking about this quite as much, because I think this is going to be a broadcast of two parts, right? Because we've got a lot to talk about. One of the things that I'm going to talk about is the cinematic adaptations of it. We'll talk about that. I'm going to talk about video games. I am going to talk about the Jodorowsky aborted film, which is, if you don't know the story about that, that's nuts. But also the cultural impact on something that lots of people might know about, which is Warhammer 40,000, because that is the biggest tabletop game in the world, right? It has made Games Workshop millions and millions and millions and millions of pounds over the years. It's their flagship product. And I did know that it was inspired. Rick Priestley, who wrote Warhammer 40,000, was a big fan of Frank Herbert. So much that he's essentially nicked a whole bunch of ideas from it, including the idea of this God Emperor. But the interesting thing about Warhammer when it was launched in 1987, something like that, is that it was a parody. It was supposed to be a kind of really grim parody of a fascist view of the universe. And that has long disappeared into a much more binary, black and white, good versus evil world. But that response is quite a sophisticated response to Herbert, who has, of course, been accused of fascist leanings. That's another big.
And I would say that is also problematic. Like these books, like they go deeply into social ideas, and there are, like I said, there are a lot of criticisms voiced by characters in the book of Leto II, the God Emperor, and nuanced discussions of things. But my overwhelming impression as a reader of the books was that Frank Herbert's views reside very firmly with first Paul Atreides and then Leto II, the SANDWORM, God Emperor. And those views are primarily very, I don't know if I would say fascist, but they're autocratic. There are rants against democracy, for sure, and frequently. And and ultimately, there's this thing called the Golden Path, which Leto II and Paul believe that they're following, which is essentially a path of, do you allow people freedom or do you control them for their own good and to protect the species? It's never entirely clear what they are protecting the species from. Probably the honoured madre and the women with their hideous sexual urges and the homosexuals, which will come on to.
Right, yeah.
But
because there's a fascist reading of this, right?
And there is a fascist reading of this. I mean, let me just... I feel like I keep referring to this without skirting around
let's
it.
do. So I'm just in terms of this episode, let's get it out.
I feel like I just want to get it out, then I can stop. I can stop. I mean, again, not that I want to go into Herbert bashing, but I actually feel this aspect deserves to be bashed, right? So the main, I mean, the first book is one of the ones where there is the most homophobia, and it's basically to do with the fact that the Harkonnens are pretty irredeemably bad in, they're real, almost cartoonish baddies. They're grotesque.
And they're based on the Finns, on Finland. Did you know that?
You did tell me that. It's interesting. They're bald in the Denis Villeneuve films, and in the Lynch film, they have these huge orange eyebrows and orange hair. But
it's a Finnish name.
Harkonnen. Interesting. Okay, well, apologies to the Finns, but basically, the depiction of the Baron Harkonnen is explicitly not coded. He is explicitly homosexual. He's constantly ogling in the book young boys, looking at their backsides, describing the underage protagonist Paul Atreides as having such a sweet young body, thinking about the things he wants to do with them. And it leans into all the predatory stereotypes about homosexual men,
of course,
offensive slurs about paedophilic desires, about incestuous desires, because he also has an incestuous urges towards Phaedra for his nephew, body shaming. I mean, it's a grotesque, hideous portrayal of a homosexual man as the disgusting uber villain, and it's very homophobic. And so this is in the first book. Later, particularly in the God Emperor of Dune book, we come into he starts going on, or Frank Herbert starts going on, or Leto II through Frank Herbert starts going on, and through his General Moneo, about this idea, this theory that homosexuality is linked to sadism and to the desire to cause pain to other people, and that same-sex relationships are inherently violent and destructive. He has this idea that he creates this female army of fish speakers, and says he doesn't want a male army because homosexuality is like a normal phase that people can grow out of by the time they're 18 or 19, and that's normal. But if you stay doing the gay stuff after that, you become pathologically violent, and that most people in all-male armies are gay, all at it, and vicious, sadistic brutes. And it's really homophobic.
Really.
And really homophobic.
That's awful.
And there's real rants. And I think what is also, in the view of some critics, and I think I agree with this, not to over historicize and bring writers' backgrounds into it. I think he notoriously had two sons, one of whom is the good son, Brian Herbert, who wrote all the Dune books, is still producing the Villeneuve films, and writing the graphic novels, is still heavily involved. He has the good son. Then he had a son called Bruce Herbert, who was a gay activist, and who was pretty much, I don't know if he was completely cut off and disowned by his parents, but certainly there's some drama about his father not letting him come and see his mother while he was dying, which he attributed to him being gay. It was quite full on.
I mean, that's really I mean, there's a novel or a play or a drama about Frank Herbert to be written about that. I mean,
there is definitely.
You were telling me, Jay, that it's the best-selling science fiction novel of all time.
Yeah, I think that must refer to the first book. But the first book has got this very, very homophobic character in it.
Because what we're talking about, of course, is what also you're saying is that Frank Herbert cut his son off financially.
He cut his son off.
Right? Frank Herbert made a load of money off this book, like so much money.
Yeah.
So that's really shocking and really upsetting to hear, actually.
It is shocking. It's more that, like a lot of the stuff in the book, is of its time in attitudes to various social things. But I think this is not of its time. It's more extreme. And so the thing about the children, so the depiction of children in this book is deeply weird. It ties into a theory which is not just about children, but pervades all the books, which is the idea that you can already see in the first film with Jessica talking to the child Alia in her womb.
Yeah.
That if you fall pregnant when you're on spice, like taking large amounts of spice, and you happen to be an Atreides and the culmination of the best Bene Gesserit breeding line and a slightly superior person, according to Frank Herbert, you can give birth to a child who is born as not only as a mini adult with an adult consciousness, but has access to the memories of the past lives of all their parents and all their ancestors. So both Alia, Paul's younger sister, and the two children who are the children of Dune, Leto II, who becomes the SANDWORM, and his sister Gamina, are born speaking from full sentences, even though they're tiny, with completely adult consciousnesses. Indeed, in the case of twins, stretching back to original Earth, remembering Shakespeare and Chaucer, which is all like okay. But where it becomes very problematic is they're born with sexual memories. Not only sexual memory, they're born with sexual memories of being their parents. So they have sexual memories of having sex with each other. So Alia is not constantly, but there are references to Alia wanting Paul to marry her and feeling attracted to him. The twins at the age of 9 are talking about their sexual attraction to each other and whether they should get married. And it's dodgy. and Alia is that, I mean, it's very dodgy, and I don't think it's excusable by saying, oh, well, they weren't really 9-year-olds. They were, it's like, it's very disturbing to read.
Mhm.
And the presentation of Alia in maybe a more low grade way is quite sexualized. You know, when she's 15, she's like does all this fighting naked and is seen by the Duncan Idaho Gola and ends up having sex with him, and he's much older than her. Although the Gola is supposed to be born a bit younger than the original Duncan Idaho, but it's sort of nasty
At this
sexualization.
stage, I don't care because it's
Yeah, at
so
this stage you kind of
deeply
don't care.
like it. You know, it's an interesting because I think Joe will have to wrap this episode up in a minute,
Okay.
and then pick up just because I've got to go and feed my infant son. For those of you watching,
Yes, he's an
um,
actual infant with no
but
genetic memories.
downstairs. But I think what is interesting is that it comes back to like when you describe that to me, I don't want to read the books, right? I go, I don't want to read that, and I don't want to
Sorry,
read
viewers.
the rantings of a homophobe. And I think it's really interesting that because of course the David Lynch film makes that very explicit in terms of the way in which Baron Harkonnen is presented. And it, you know, as you and I have talked about before this, you know, there are articles written about that film, which of course accuse the film of homophobia,
Yeah,
as opposed to
it's been
saying, well,
accused of being
you know,
the most
homophobic.
obscenely homophobic film of all time. And I think in some ways, we'll talk about the Lynch film, but just to wrap up the homophobia discussion,
Yeah.
that is justified because David Lynch goes further than in the book. He invents this scene, which is called the heart plug scene. Heart plugs aren't in the book, in which the Baron Harkonnen pulls the heart plug out of a slave boy. I don't think an underage slave boy, but a very young man. And then rapes him to death on screen while all the other Harkonnens like leer. And it also introduces the idea of vampirism, of Baron Harkonnen being a vampire. And the link between vampirism and homosexuality was at a common slur leveled at homosexual men in the 19th century. So I have to say that Lynch, I think when we talk about Lynch, I think Lynch really embraces the weirdness in the books, and he has said that he regrets his depiction of gay men in that book,
100%.
in that film. So
I think, you know, absolutely. I mean, I suppose what I'm saying is that it's if you insert that scene without having any justification for it, then you've got homophobia. But if your job as a filmmaker is to go, you know, in the 80s, you know, I mean, Lynch just dials everything up in that film.
He does everything up.
Every bit is dialed up. And
he was less aware. I mean, I think
100%.
possibly. I mean, look, I don't want to apologise for homophobia. I think with Lynch, we can maybe say that he does have the of its time excuse. But yeah, I mean, just to wrap up because there's one thing that I feel I have to raise when it comes to the depiction of children, and I'm actually not going to describe this incident in detail, although I have told you about it because I just think it's so disgusting that I don't even want to say it on YouTube. But in the fourth book, chapter, the sixth book, Chapter House Dune, there's this thing that I mentioned, these Golas, these clones who have to have their genetic, they're not born, they're clones of a past incarnation, but they're not born with memories, that their memories are reawakened at a certain point. So with most of the Gola, there's a point where they go, oh my God, I remember being Duncan Idaho and being him 1,000 times and blah, blah, blah. So there is a Gola who's created in this book of a character called Teg, who's a general in the Bene Gesserit army, who is an older character. In the previous book, he's brought back as a Gola. And I think he's 10 in this book. He's definitely prepubescent. And in order to reawaken his genetic memories, something is done to him, which is serious sexual assault, to reawaken his genetic memories. And it's it's horrific. And it's genuinely horrific. Like, I felt sick reading it. I feel sick thinking about it now. It's really bad. And I do think that if Lynch, apologies, Lynch. If Herbert had written this now, he would be rightly completely vilified and written off for it. And I just feel like, in honesty, I just need to raise that. I won't mention it
Yeah.
again, but it's a
No,
thing.
but it's interesting. I mean, there's a whole bigger. Look, again, we haven't had time to talk about it, but there's a whole bigger thing around depiction of children, sexual desire, not just in Dune, in science fiction fantasy written in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and the actual real world reality of people like Marion Zimmer Bradley, who was a paedophile, and that is really problematic. And I wonder if it's because science fiction fantasy kind of lives in this kind of like little subculture where people don't talk about it.
That's
Like it's
interesting.
it's an interesting thing.
I think there is a lot of slack given to
Yeah.
science fiction fantasy. And again, I don't want to get into like I'm so conscious of not wanting to bash beloved figures, and I
No, no,
think
no.
it's an interesting point that you've made that I was really interested when you said I feel like I don't need to read the Dune books now, because there is you can appropriate without wanting to name names. You can reappropriate books by writers whose views you don't approve of, and even writers whose done things in the source material you don't approve of, and they can become
100%.
parts of wider worlds, wider
Yeah.
fandoms where things are reimagined in
Well,
different
you
ways.
can name it. You can name Lovecraft, right?
Well, look, that wasn't actually the
and
name I
other
was
people.
thinking of, but
I
yes,
know who you were
Lovecraft,
thinking of, and we're not going to say
Lovecraft,
that.
yes.
But
But
Lovecraft is a good example.
it's a great example. Like, you can love Lovecraft, as I think we both do, and deplore Lovecraft's
Yeah,
racism, which
awful.
again was so extreme that it was not of its
Yes,
time. It was
it's
really extreme.
unpleasant. It's
It's
when you
really
meet it, it's so unpleasant.
it's really unpleasant. So, um, and there is a wider Dune universe and a wider Dune fandom,
Yeah.
which
Well,
goes beyond and above this.
which is where I think we should pick up next time, right?
Okay, great. Well, let's
I
do
think
that.
that's been a really great session, Jay, and we've navigated to a point where we can pick up on that and run with it, moving onwards. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank
That was
you.
great. All right.
Oh my
Speak
God,
to you soon.
42 minutes. All right, we'll say goodbye. We'll be back with another episode soon,
All right.
where we will talk about more widely. We will talk about the Lynch film in more detail. We will talk about the filmmaker whose name I forget, but
Jodorowsky.
we'll talk about the Jodorowsky film. We'll talk more about tabletop role-playing games, and I'll also get a little bit more into how Frank Herbert uses autocracy, genetics, and the issues of time and space travel and space generally.
And we
That's to
will
look forward
also
to.
be talking more about Warhammer 40,000.
We always talk about Warhammer 40,000.
Okay.
Yes, we may have played another game by then. Who knows?